Navajo folklore is among the most famous and unsettling in North America. From skinwalkers, the evil witches that prey upon the unsuspecting, to the Tse Nagahi, the rocks that throw themselves at people, Navajo mythology is full of creepy creatures that seem to exist only to terrorize you. So today, we're taking a look at stories that take place within Navajo mythology, on Navajo land, or have been experienced by Navajo people themselves. Enjoy, and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. I'm looking for stories that happened on the Smoky Mountains. Also, the last few stories are older stories that fit today's category. I had a hard time completing a full script on this subject, but it's one I've been wanting to do for a while. Now, let's begin. Skinwalker in Tuba City. From Anonymous. This is my true Skinwalker story. At the time of this experience, I had no knowledge, nor had I ever heard of a skinwalker. I was 19 years old at the time and lived in Phoenix, Arizona with my parents while attending community college. My sister-in-law had asked me to go with her to Tuba City, Arizona, to visit with her mother and pick up some papers. Her mother was a school teacher there on the Navajo reservation. We would be staying there overnight. Her mother lived in one of those small government houses on the reservation. There were about 3 or 4 houses near her on a small paved street. Except for a few buildings near there, it was pretty desolate. My niece and nephew were with us. We'll call my sister-in-law Mary, my nephew Mike, and my niece Amy. Mike was 10 years old at the time, and Amy was 9. It was early evening when we finally arrived in Tuba City. We had stopped at a fast food restaurant on the way to pick up dinner to go. Upon arriving at the house, we all ate together at a small kitchen table. We talked and visited a while before settling in the small living room to watch some TV. There wasn't a lot to do there, so Mary and I decided we would take a night drive and explore around the reservation. I know what you're thinking. It was a very bad idea, or a dumb idea. 2 white women who are in a strange place have no business driving around at night on an Indian reservation. Whatever. We drove around for about an hour and a half. Surprisingly, nothing weird had happened yet. We were just laughing, talking, and listening to music as we drove up and down dirt roads. After a while, we decided to head back. When arriving back home, we stayed up a little bit later, then decided it was time to go to bed. I slept in a small back bedroom on a twin bed next to a window with horizontal blinds. My nephew Mike slept on the floor in a sleeping bag in the same room. Mary and Amy were in the other room, down the hallway. During the night, I was awakened by strange scratching noises outside the window by my bed. It sounded like something was making long, deliberate, slow clawing sounds down the window, like when someone runs their nails down a chalkboard. I'm a light sleeper, so this woke me up right away. I whispered loudly to my nephew Mike to wake up, asking him if he was hearing the same thing I was. Mike was sleepy and groggy, being awakened from a deep slumber, so he seemed confused at first. I asked him again if he had heard the scratching noise. He didn't answer. He was just out of it. He then lay back down and was out like a light. I was perplexed and a little frightened. I thought to myself maybe it was just a stray cat or dog, but I couldn't figure it out. I did, however, have no inclination to look out that window, so I simply lay there, listening. After several minutes, the clawing stopped. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I mentioned this at the kitchen table during breakfast, but no one seemed very interested. We left later that afternoon, and I never gave it another thought. 6 months later, I was attending one of my college classes called Indians of the Southwest. The teacher was lecturing us about different legends and stories of the Navajo people. He touched upon tales of evil medicine men, or witches, called skinwalkers. He began telling us that they are very dangerous and harmful. They have the ability to turn into or disguise themselves as any animal. They could take the guise of a coyote, wolf, or even a bear. They've also been known to follow people home at night. That's why you should never be out on the reservation after dark. You're never supposed to make eye contact with a skinwalker because they can possess your soul. You should never talk about them because you can draw them to you. They can cause havoc and bring evil into your life. An icy chill went down my spine. I remembered that night I'd spent on the reservation. I wondered if a skinwalker had followed Mary and I home that night after our drive. The realization that a skinwalker had targeted us fills me with fear. I think of this often, and I'm so glad I didn't look out the window that night. I'm also haunted by the fact that there was just a very thin pane of glass separating me from such an evil entity. And now I guess I know why no one in the family wanted to talk about it. My Mother's Haunting, from Fallen Angel. The year was 2004 in Southern California. I was 16 years old. I'm Native American, Navajo. My grandmother was a medicine woman and at a young age was in the process of teaching me her ways. When I was a child, she always told me to not be afraid of anything I might see, that I was special. Ever since then, it was like a gate opened in me, and I began to see things and feel. I do hear them sometimes, cries and screams like whispers in my ears. This causes me to have to wear earbuds to sleep, playing some music in order to drown them out and sleep. I've been through a lot of hauntings through my childhood till this day in 2021, but this haunting was one that has upset me, as something attacked my mother. One day my mother came to me, and I could see she looked so drained, like she hadn't had good sleep in a long time. I asked her what was wrong, when I noticed she seemed scared. She said to me, "I'm terrified to sleep. Every night I get woke up, and I can't move at all, and all of a sudden I see something dark slowly crawling from the edge of the bed by my feet, climbing up my legs all the way to me. All I can do is cry. I feel hands on my neck starting to choke me. I try to move to wake up your dad, but nothing happens." I kept my eyes on her, listening to her story, to her every word. I'm no stranger to the supernatural, and I know ways to keep things away. This angered me that something in my family's home was hurting my mother. I tried to calm her down and assure her she would be okay. "Mom, come sleep in my room tonight. I'll stay up and watch you as you sleep, and I'll see if I can catch it." I have a little dog named Princess. She was a very good dog. She would sleep with me in my room and she'd always growl when she felt danger, tangible or supernatural. Through the night, she would keep watch of me all the time, and she made me feel safe. That night, my mother came into my room, lay on the bed, and I told her to sleep, reminding her that I'd be here so she didn't have to worry. It was around 10 p.m. at the time, and she fell fast asleep. I stayed up right next to her with my dog in the middle of us. The dog soon fell asleep too. At around 2 a.m., nothing had yet happened, so I got up to use the bathroom. As I was coming out of the bathroom, I looked at my bedroom door, which I kept open just in case, and a dark figure ran past inside. In my head, I thought, well, here we go. I walked back into my room and closed the door behind me. I lay on the bed and waited for anything to happen. Before long, I was getting bored, since nothing was happening. I lay on my stomach with my hand holding my head. I let out a long breath, folded my hands, and lay my head on them facing away from the door. Not even 1 second passed and I heard my door open. I had a quick conversation in my head, and it went something like this. Did someone else wake up? Maybe my little brother? He must have woke up. As I was saying this in my head, I felt like someone was shaking the bed, but only by our heads. They were shaking it in a way as if they were testing to see if a person was awake. I said again in my head, it must be my little brother. I better get up to see if he's okay. But when I tried to move, I couldn't at all. My head, my hands, nothing. I was completely frozen. The moment I noticed I couldn't move, I began to feel something climbing on the bed and on top of my mother. My heart began to pound, and I was thinking of what I could do. I felt something like a leg on the side of me from this thing that was on my mom. The bed felt like it was sinking in the middle, and whatever this was had its foot on my dog. My dog didn't even move either, didn't make a noise this whole time. I fought in my head, saying I had to do something. I need to. Think. At that moment, my side began to feel like it was on fire. It hurt so bad, making me lose focus on trying to think. But I endured it all. I blocked out the pain, my fear, my panic. I said to myself to pray. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't remember any prayers at the moment, nothing. I couldn't even make one up. I was blocked, so I looked at my hand that was close to my face and I tried to focus on it, saying in my head, "Open your hand. Just open it." I tried and nothing was happening. I kept saying it over and over. It felt like hours now, but I needed to fight this and save my mom from this evil spirit. But then I felt the top of my fingers. I took that and I began to try and open my hand fully and slowly. I could feel it moving. As I felt my hand open just a bit, this thing jumped off my bed and ran out of the room. I heard my bedroom door slam shut, and as it slammed, I felt this surge go through my body, and I could finally fully move again. I looked at my mom, and she was okay. I let out a sigh of relief and tears just started flowing. My mom woke up, asking what had happened and why I was crying like that. I told her, let's get out of the room. So she and I went to the living room, and I told her everything that occurred. After that, she looked so scared. As I finished the story, we heard something that sounded like something running on hardwood. We looked up, and it was coming from the attic. But this time, it sounded like it was trying to get away. And then it was gone. We didn't know what it was that was haunting my mom, but after that night, it never came back, and my mom thanked me for helping her. The Woods of Yosemite and Stanislaus, from 3rd GR2T. I'm a local to the Mariposa and Yosemite National Park area. I've lived here as far as I can remember, and in my time here, I've definitely experienced weird things. While I have several stories, I'll tell the one that sticks with me the most. To start, I'm Native American, from several tribes, including Navajo and Miwok. As far as I can remember, even as a little kid, something has always bothered me about the Mariposa and Yosemite area as a whole. This particular event took place towards where Yosemite and Stanislaus National Forest meets. It was deer season, and my family and I went hunting within the Stanislaus National Forest. We'd heard about an area that had decent-sized bucks. We decided to set up camp and to head out the next morning. The area we set up camp at had a clearing to our left and a hill in the distance, and a forest and brush to the right. This was the first time I'd ever hunted this specific area, but according to some family, the hill in the distance across the clearing was an old Native American burial ground. This I never proved or disproved, no matter how much I researched. The first night was very uneventful and quiet, like dead quiet. No owls or coyotes, nothing. We spent the next day hunting with no luck, besides spotting a few birds. As we came back to camp and night settled in, we noticed once again it was dead quiet. Later that night, I was up alone thinking to myself when I heard footsteps. I tried not to think too much of it. I mean, we were in the woods, right? It was probably just an animal. The night was clear, after all, no clouds, full moon, lots of stars, but the longer I listened, the louder and heavier these footsteps got. But as I looked outside, I couldn't see anything, and we were on flat ground, and yet I could see nothing. I started to think that's weird. I did a small scan in a 360-degree direction with a flashlight, and still nothing. I could definitely hear the footsteps still, and I could smell a low odor, but I couldn't distinguish what it was. Just as I began to think this was weird, I heard a howl off in the distance. It was closely followed by several more. The thing that took me by surprise is the fact the howling I heard got a reply that was way too close for comfort. The howling continued as well as the footsteps for most of the night. It seemed to get close and then distance itself several times over. I get most of you hearing this story probably think it was just some animal. I myself thought that until I realized coyotes don't have heavy-sounding steps or a weird underlying smell. I definitely felt watched, but tried to rationalize it to myself, but I just couldn't find a good explanation that suited my mind. The following day was quite uneventful, just more hunting with little to no animals seen, though it did seem almost quiet again. No birds, no anything, just the occasional breeze. That night we broke camp and went back to Mariposa. While the day was fine, that night was not. When I was home that night, I had the overwhelming feeling of being watched. I felt super paranoid. This feeling seems to happen every time I am back close to Yosemite and Stanislaus's border, or when I'm in Stanislaus National Forest, even if this event is not on my mind. I know this story may not seem exactly scary, but it has bothered me for a long time. I just don't speak about it. I understand some people may have explanations, but certain things of this event don't make sense to me. My uncle's Skinwalker suspect, from D the Beast 14. My uncle is a cop in Salt Lake City, Utah. One night on March 12, 2016, he and his partner were sent to respond to a call. The call was made by a husband and wife driving by a forest. They saw two hikers dead and partially mutilated. So my uncle and his partner were sent to go check it out. Coincidentally and thankfully, my uncle's partner is of Navajo descent. If he wasn't, I don't know if either of them would be alive today. The two of them arrived at the scene. Two men that appeared to be in their early 20s were, in fact, mutilated. The bodies were about 200 feet apart from each other, so my uncle and his partner decided to split up. While my uncle was examining one of these bodies, he heard a whistle off in the darkness to his right. He shined his flashlight in that direction and called out a warning, telling the suspect to keep their hands up. He then heard a voice in the same direction that sounded like a cop that sometimes worked shifts with him and his partner. The voice said, "Come over here, please." Hesitantly, he begins to move toward it, with his gun drawn slowly. He realized something that hit him like a bullet. That cop didn't work late shifts that day of the week, and if he did, they would have been told. Plus, he shouldn't have been on that scene anyway. He then gets a call on his radio from his partner saying, "We have to go now." He then sees an old man who looked to be in his 60s exiting the forest. He orders the man to stop. The man runs off, but my uncle chases him. According to my uncle, that man ran faster than anyone in their 60s should be able to run. He ran down a steep hill. Once my uncle reached the hill, the man was just gone. Instead, all he found was a coyote running the other way. His partner came over and yelled, "We need to get to the car!" So the two of them hightailed it out of there. His partner explained to him that he saw these slashes on one of the victims, and he saw the tracks in the mud, and he knew what it was. He explained to my uncle it was a skinwalker, and what it was capable of doing. That if my uncle had followed the voice all the way, he might have been taken. Then, in the rearview mirror, a wolf was chasing after the car at an incredible speed. My uncle shot at it, but it ran off into the woods after that. My uncle's partner took them to the nearest Navajo reservation where a medicine man blessed the two of them. They were given some weird object as protection. When they got back to the station, they explained that the hikers were killed by a pack of wolves. Someone was sent out to recover the bodies, but by the time they got there, the bodies were gone. The medicine man's blessing must have worked, because neither my uncle nor his partner have seen the skinwalker ever since, and hopefully never will. Creature in New Mexico, from Tiffany M. My husband, mother-in-law, myself, and at the time our 3 children were moving back to Oregon from Tennessee in early 2015. We were bound to have a terrible time as soon as we started. I mean, right away we began having serious car trouble. After getting through slowly to New Mexico, we got temporarily stranded at a small settlement on the Navajo reservation. At first, everything was fine. The people who lived there were amazing, kind, and overall some of the best people I've ever met. We had some dogs at the time and were told under no circumstances to leave or let them out after dark, as being in the middle of nowhere, there were several types of predators around, among quote-unquote other things that would love to get a hold of your dogs. That was fine with us, as it was an unfamiliar area. In the meantime, we did what we'd been doing all along and began trying to find a new water pump and thermostat for the car. This took almost a week, and the closest place was the next town over, which was about 20 miles away. While searching for these items and how to get there, things began getting a little strange, to say the least. The people began to get more nervous around us, aside from the children who lived in the small community. Cats and other house pets started turning up missing through our stay, things of that nature. Well, the kids decided to take us out exploring one day, with their parents' permission, of course. They decided to take us to a short cave they knew of. We left around 10:30 a.m., and it was about an hour walk to the cave. Nothing was overly strange about the cave, or the half-hour walk through it, from one side to the other. There were a couple of bats, some low-hanging pieces of rock we had to belly crawl under, pretty much normal cave stuff. However, when we got out on the other side, it was getting dark. That in and of itself was extremely odd, and shouldn't have been possible. However, it was, so we decided to take the road back to make sure we wouldn't lose our footing if it got dark. Then the really strange things happened. There was no wind, and it was eerily silent. The kids we were with had begun to almost run back to the small town, and we were all doing all we could to keep up with them. It felt as if we were being watched and stalked at the same time. There were no sounds of crickets or other night insects. Then we began hearing what sounded like coyotes howling and yipping quite suddenly, and they were close. Then came the voices of some of the tribe members. The kids told us to ignore the voices, to not look behind us no matter what. All the while, they kept their heads tilted slightly down. We did as we were told, as the voices continued to call our names one by one. When it began to use my mother-in-law's voice, trying to get my attention, I knew this was all wrong. It even used the whistle she uses to call us when we're out and about, to let us know something is up. After about 20 minutes, one of the adults showed up in their car to pick us up. When we got inside to go back, we were asked what we heard or saw. We explained everything. We could see the color drain from his face. He floored it, but before he could, I looked everywhere for a source of the calls, but saw nothing. Though I did smell sulfur and death, which were thick in the air by this point. The following morning, we were told we needed to leave, as we were bringing devils around by being there. We were told it was nothing against us personally, and they wished they could do more to help us out, but they wanted us gone. We had until sundown, but even then, that was more than enough time. We got all of our things, and we were in the next town in less than an hour. My mother-in-law asked what that was all about. She and I are believers, but my husband is not. We both told her the same thing about the voices, and she went pale as well. None of us could explain it away. We decided there was only one thing this could have been: a skinwalker in the New Mexico desert.
Navajo Skinwalker in Colorado. Submitted by Hunter L. My story begins in Colorado. I was 14 years old at the time. My family was taking a trip to visit my grandmother, who lives deep in the country. We were planning to stay over a few nights and enjoy the peace and quiet of the country. I've always been more of an indoorsy person, but I did love taking a nice hike through the woods from time to time. The highway drive was long and uneventful, but once we finally got there, I was super excited. After all, I had my own room in the beautiful cabin my grandmother lived in, with an amazing view of the lake and forests surrounding the property. I exchanged greetings with her, and after a few minutes of idle conversation, I headed to my room. I pulled out my laptop and began to get set up for a quality gaming session when I first heard the howling. It sounded like a wolf's cry, but slower, almost distorted, like if you recorded the howl and played it back at half the speed and lowered the pitch. That's how it sounded. It was very creepy, but having little to no experience living in the country, I brushed it off, assuming it was some animal I wasn't accustomed to. Soon the sun began to set, and I was exhausted at the time, partly from the really long car ride. I began to get settled into bed, and despite the thick comforter, something didn't feel right. It's a feeling that's hard to describe, like something was misplaced or missing. I didn't know what it was, but again I brushed it off, telling myself it was just weird to sleep in an unfamiliar place, and soon I drifted off to sleep. I woke up around 10 in the morning feeling really well rested, and I looked through my window. I could see that it had gotten foggy, as there were billowing clouds of mist drifting through the trees outside, and it was raining too, heavily. It was a bit difficult to see through the windows due to the excessive amount of water outside. I threw on some pajamas and went to grab some breakfast. When I walked into the kitchen, there was a note on the table. According to the note, my family left the house to grab some medication for my grandma and that they'd be back in a couple of hours. So I settled with eating some frosted flakes. I was sitting on the comfortable couch directly under the living room window, watching the rain and fog roll in. Then again, I heard that eerie howl, the same howl from the night before. It was so slow and thick, so deliberate. As that happened, I noticed a figure creep forward through the fog. Of course, foggy weather in the country can be extremely thick. I couldn't see anything over 5 feet from the window, and I could barely make it out. But it looked like a dog or a wolf, almost anyway. The feeling that something was wrong, very, very wrong with this animal suddenly hit me. Slowly, as the form of this thing came through the fog, I realized why I was feeling that way. The creature was standing on its back legs. Its back legs, I thought. I was shocked and confused. When I finally could think clearly, I looked at the creature in more detail. Its legs were twisted, bent in weird ways, almost like it was hit by a car. Of course, up here by the cabin, the closest road that's often used is a good mile away. As I looked on in horror, the creature spun around, and on its two hind legs, sprinted. In moments, it disappeared into the thick fog. As it turned around, though, I could see that it had no tail. Literally no tail, like it was ripped off or never there. The moment I snapped myself out of that trance, I instantly ran back to my room, shutting and locking the door. I hopped on my laptop, trying to Google and find out exactly what I saw. When my family finally got back, around 3, I waited until my parents were out of the room to tell my grandma. My parents would never believe me anyway. She was part Native American, but not that she was Navajo. She told me what she believed I saw was a skinwalker. Supposedly, it's a shape-shifting spirit or witch that takes the form of animals in order to harm people. However, it can never perfectly replicate the animal it takes the form of. When we left 3 days later, I was happy to get out of those foggy woods. After researching the legend of the Skinwalker further, I honestly believe that that is what I saw. So to all of those listening, be careful when you go deep into the countryside of Colorado. If I met that creature outside of that cabin, I don't think I'd be here to share this story.